Hey, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. And this is our interview number 84. We're getting closer to that magical 100 mark. Doug Copley joins us today. He is the founder and fractional CIO and CISO for Data Protection Partners. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Greg.
So we'd love to start out here, your cybersecurity journey. Why did you get into this field to begin with? And how did that lead you to being a fractional CIO and CISO? And along the way, what is a fractional CIO and CISO?
Yeah, all good questions. Yeah, I don't think I could have ever predicted the path of my journey. I started out of school, went right into Accenture doing IT, integration consulting work and did that for 10 years and then jumped over to Ford Motor Company. Being from Michigan, you got to work for an auto company at one point.
I've got an F-150 myself. I love it. So
Yeah. So I worked for them, and while I was employed there, I took the opportunity. I had learned about the CISSP, and so I took the opportunity to study for that, take the test, and pass that, and was working on the experience requirements. And Sarbanes-Oxley came around, and Ford found out that I had my CISSP and pulled me into that effort. So I got a couple of good international trips out of it to Sweden and to Japan.
nice.
Because of their relationships with Volvo Car and Mazda. So yeah, I spent 5 years with Ford and then moved over to Ally Financial, which was GMAC at the time that I moved over there. And worked in the security team at that point, reporting to the CISO. And about 3 years into that tenure, I took the chief privacy officer role. So I'm probably one of the few CISOs out there who's also been a chief privacy officer as a standalone role, as opposed to a combined one. So great experience as a privacy officer in financial services. And then left that role for a CISO position at Beaumont Health, which is a big health system in the Detroit area. They were,
So you've gone from manufacturing to financial services to healthcare so far, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Fascinating.
Yep. So they kind of took a bet on me that coming from financial services, I would have a really strong security background, and I think that was probably true.
Yep, I would agree.
And so I spent about 3.5 years, or closer to 4 years, with Beaumont Health. And the reason I left was primarily stress. I know you talk about in your podcast about burnout in the CISO role, and particularly in healthcare. Healthcare is a challenging environment to manage in, and the stress just got to me, and I said I need to do something different. And then I decided to jump into the vendors for jobs. So I was an advisory CISO for ForcePoint for about 1.5 years, and then an advisory CISO for Duo Security for about a year. I was on a 1-year contract with them. And how I got into the virtual CISO work happened while I was at Duo. So I knew I was on a 1-year contract, and about 6 months into that contract, a company from Grand Rapids, who's fairly local to me, I'm about 45 minutes, reached out to me and said, hey, we would really like somebody to help guide our IT and security, but we're a 45-person company. I don't need you full time. So would you be willing to do it part time? And so I agreed to do that. And then about a month later, I had a company that I had used at Beaumont, who's a security consulting company in healthcare, reach out to me and say, hey, we have this company down in Mississippi that needs help. They had a breach. Their regulators are all over them. Can you help them out maybe 15 hours a week? And so I agreed to take that on. And then about a month later, they called me for another client in New York City who needed to get HITRUST certified. So, by the time my contract ended at Duo, I was already fully employed right, on a
That's
part-time
awesome.
basis with 3 other companies.
That's great. I
So,
mean, they always talk about like having runway when you start a consulting business, but you did it the right way, and it just sort of happened organically. So
yeah,
you built that runway, future looking, before you actually ended the contract with Duo. So that's great, and
yeah.
that's what led you to where you're at today.
So I was very, very fortunate that it kind of played out the way it did. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sure. So having not only been doing the virtual CISO, fractional CISO, and we'll talk about the differences or the similarities between those in just a moment.
Mhm.
I'm sure that you've seen a lot of different issues, threats to small and mid-sized businesses, being in manufacturing, healthcare, finance, and I'm sure other verticals by this point in time. So when we come back, I want to ask you what your opinion is on the most or a couple of the most significant threats to small and mid-sized businesses, information security today. So we'll be right back. vCISO Catalyst is the ultimate community for cybersecurity specialists who believe in collaborating to strengthen the security of small to mid-sized businesses. Join the vCISO Catalyst today and be part of a community that shares your passion for cybersecurity, knowledge, and professional growth. Together, we can create a safer world for everyone. Visit our website at www.vcisocatalyst.org and start your journey with vCISO Catalyst today. So before we answer that question, I want to just get back to I've heard the term VC, so I've obviously used it, or CISO, whatever you want
Yeah.
to pronounce it, and I've also heard the term fractional CISO. Are they synonymous, or is there a difference between the two in your eyes?
I mean, to me, there's really not a difference.
Hmm.
Virtual is just whether you're going in or not, to me, right, is location based. Are you remote or not?
Hmm.
Um, but I look at vCISO as fractional. I think what I've always pitched in my business is not this kind of project based vCISO services that I see a lot of vendors offering. I look at it more as a staff aug,
Hmm.
part-time CISO, where I come in and I step in as their CISO and function as their CISO, just not on a full-time basis.
So maybe if there was a difference, and really it's kind of splitting hairs at this point in time, but if there was a difference, a vCISO might be a subset of a fractional CISO, whereas a virtual CISO is primarily virtual, as you said, and a fractional CISO is one that's probably more local, that sort of thing, can be on site more, but certainly could be virtual as well.
Yeah,
Okay, because I
and
know.
I'll openly admit all the work that I've been doing the last 5 years, I've been completely remote.
Okay,
There's been
well,
once in a great while where I will go to the client site because they want me there for something. But
and that would be the same as me as well too. Usually the trigger for going on site is usually falls underneath one of two buckets. Either it's an audit support, so you're kind of playing the translator there in front of the auditor, and that's a lot less now
Mhm.
because of with COVID. You don't have the audit in person as much anymore. They've kind of like extended that where they're
Yeah.
comfortable doing it remotely. And then also, like if you're going to run a quarterly governance committee meeting or something like that, sometimes doing that like at least once a year on
Yeah.
site is good.
Yeah,
Okay,
or
well,
report out to the board or whatever. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
Well, having said that, thoughts on significant information security threat to small and mid-sized businesses?
Well, I think first of all, there's a misperception out there that the threats to small businesses are different than the ones to larger businesses.
Hmm.
Um, from what I've seen, um, the attackers go after the easy targets. I mean, it doesn't matter who they are, where they are. They're using their mechanisms and they're trying to penetrate anybody that they can. And once they get in, then they figure out, okay, what's this company have that might be useful to us, right? Do we just ransomware them, or is their data worthwhile that we want to steal? So I think the primary ones that I've seen and I've had to deal with is clearly ransomware. I've dealt with that a couple of times. I had a DDoS issue earlier this year by a geopolitical hacktivist group, which was an interesting event. I think, there's been numerous credential compromise attacks, and I think for small businesses to realize, right, these are your phishes and other phone calls and things trying to grab credentials. But I've seen some interesting cases that maybe we can talk about if we have time about credential compromise. But I think the other issue is just mistakes. I've often said that SMBs don't really have the knowledge per se, right? Kind of one of the arguments for a vCISO, right? They don't have the knowledge of exactly what is needed or what they should be doing. And so things get put out there that are publicly facing that are not adequately protected. And so it's not like they're doing it intentionally. They're just making a mistake because they don't have the knowledge to secure it correctly.
Yeah, because sometimes the perception is more or less that it's just an IT issue. It's like, well, I have a firewall, I have antivirus, I should be good, right? But that's not all that there is. I mean, there's the whole governance. Yeah. We were just talking about that a moment ago. There's a whole slew of things. Well, what do you do when you're talking about that? You started out by saying that the threats really aren't the same, or really are the same, rather. They're not different between small businesses and large businesses when all is said and done. But what do you tell a small business CEO or CIO when they say, oh, we don't have to worry about it because we're too small? What do you say in that case?
I mean, I've got real life examples of small companies that I've supported getting attacked. So, I'll pull up some of those examples. And
do you want to talk about one of those, the credential that you were just mentioning a moment ago?
Yeah, actually, there's been two kind of interesting credential compromise situations. So one was with that first client that ever engaged me, and it was about a year ago, and they had, they were using Microsoft 365. They had dual multi-factor authentication set up, and what happened was somebody phished a credential right from an email, and the person obviously, it prompted them for credentials, like they were logging into 365. They provided the credentials, and they pretty quickly realized what they had done. And so it was less than 5 minutes that she realized what she did. She went in to reset her password in 365, and she got her Duo MFA prompt, and she accepted it. And then several seconds later, she got another Duo MFA prompt, and she's like, oh, it must be a bug or something, or Microsoft's wanting to do it more than once. So she accepted it again.
Oh, this is sort of that multi-factor authentication fatigue deal where they keep on banging on the door.
Right. Okay. So she just assumed this was either a Duo or a Microsoft bug. It was actually the attacker. And so the attacker did use those credentials. But what was so shocking about this particular attack is from the time she gave up those credentials till the time they were logging in was minutes. It wasn't hours or days.
They don't have much time, they probably figure. So it's like once they get it, they got to get in and do what they need to do, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. The other one that one of my clients experienced recently was a similar attack where somebody got phished. It took them to a mock Microsoft 365 logon page. They actually logged in, but in this case, the attacker was a little bit more sophisticated, and they were able to grab that authentication token from Microsoft. So they were kind of playing man in the middle in this case, where they were actually logging them into 365. But they grabbed that authentication token. And so by doing that, for a period of time, whatever the setting is set at, they could replay that authentication token and wouldn't get the MFA prompt again.
Right.
So, another different type of attack, definitely more sophisticated. but in both cases, kind of bypassed MFA. One because of the user's, I would say, error, and the other, I mean, again, obviously they gave up their credential, but the other was more technical and being able to grab that token and replay it.
Which is in both instances, I think it's important to point out. People have said, and I have been guilty of this in the past, and I've certainly backed off over the years, but people have been guilty of saying that, well, all you need is MFA, and once you have MFA, you're done. You have reduced your threats down to just about nothing. Now, MFA is very important. Definitely need to have it in place. But those two examples, the one MFA fatigue, and then the other grabbing the token in process, are both ways that, as you said, reduce the effectiveness of that control. And I think it's important to also point out that in both instances, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in both instances, the mitigating control, if you will, that would have prevented this from happening really is about awareness, right?
It is. I mean, in both cases, the user gave up their credentials. So it does come back to education, but I think what you and I probably echo all the time to our clients is, right, there's situations where people are in a hurry, or people expect a certain thing and they see something that looks like that. So as much as you can educate them, there's still going to be scenarios where somebody's going to inadvertently do the wrong thing. And that's where, in addition to the prevention up front, trying to educate them, right, you've got to be able to have that quick response.
Well, and also where we say, for example, we're talking about man in the middle now, where we talk about the importance of being on a VPN when you're in a public site to prevent those sorts of things. I mean, this is a real world example as to why, if for one time you decided, well, I'm just going to get on, I'm not going to use VPN, and there aren't technical controls in place for whatever reason on your system to prevent your machine from doing that, then awareness is the only place that you have. And now I'm glad that you took it one more step, where you get to the other part of this, the importance of response and being able to rapidly contain so as to mitigate the risk from exponentially getting larger. So do you find that that's an issue with small and mid-sized businesses as well, is that they don't really know how to respond?
I think yes, it is an issue, hopefully not a significant one. But that recognition and notifying people right away. I think the one thing that I still struggle with any company trying to just get this through people's heads is, hey, I'm syncing my my iPhone to my Outlook at work, and I lost my iPhone. Why should I have to report that to the company because it's my personal iPhone?
Right.
And people just don't make that connection that you've got company connections, you've got company data on that device. So we need to know about that right away so that we can kill the data on it as well.
Well, assuming that you actually had a mobile device management system in place. So,
Yes.
and in some cases is like, for very small businesses, that's usually something that they don't even really think about too much. So,
and I think, as we've talked, I think that's another challenge for the SMB companies out there is, we talked a little bit about them not having, the knowledge per se of knowing what's needed. Most of them clearly don't have adequate staffing, right? So they look at security and say, well, I'll just outsource that to a managed service provider, right? My IT managed service provider they'll take care of all that. But they don't know enough to be able to manage that managed service provider, if you will, to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But, when it comes to things like device control, right? They don't have, nor can some of them afford, but they don't have the same tool sets that enterprises do. You're not going to see a small company go out and buy Splunk for a SIM, right? Because it's too big, it's too costly. And so often they're left with what I would call, tools that are less than optimal compared to an enterprise. So that's not to say you can't do good security in SMBs, but one of the big changes for me was adapting to the tool set, because I had always worked in really big enterprise companies. And then when I helped a small company, it's like, wait, okay, I can't go out and buy this or that. We don't have the resources for that. So,
Right.
what are my small business options?
So if you have a company that they come to you, an SMB, and they say, "Well, I don't know about this fractional CISO thing. I mean, I have an MSP, all my security is taken care of." What how do you sell them on the need for it? How do you convince them that there's a real operational and strategic difference between what an MSP does and what a virtual or fractional CISO does?
I'll be honest, Greg, I don't feel like I've done a very good job of that.
Mm,
I've been pretty lucky for the last 5 years up until this year in terms of having enough business to keep me busy, right? So I haven't had to go out and sell or market much.
hmm They
Um,
already
it-
know that they need something, right?
yeah,
That yeah,
and a lot of it's been word of mouth, recommendation from one company to a different company. So they're doing that sell for me.
right.
Um, but I try to. I think the best argument for me that I use is similar to the bigger vCISO client I have right now. So this is a mid-size healthcare company on the East Coast. You can look me up on LinkedIn. It's Atlantic Care.
hmm
But the model there, they came and said, "Hey, we have a security team, but I'm not terribly comfortable that the security manager we have has the skill set that I want them to have,
hmm
and doesn't have the executive presence, right, to put in front of the board to talk about risk."
Right.
And so he reached out and said, "Hey, I want somebody who can, you know, do some strategy, make sure the team's pointed in the right direction, oversee the efforts to make sure things are going according to plan, do those presentations to executive leadership when we need them, and really just be that CISO
Yeah. Yeah.
that he didn't feel he had." And so, I've been helping them out for 3 years now. I don't see any end in sight. We both like the model. We think it works well. The only difference, you ask anybody who's the CISO, they're going to say it's
hmm
me. Do
Right.
they care whether it's virtual or fractional, or whether I'm actually an employee of the company? No.
Now, I mean,
It doesn't make any difference to them.
if you're W-2 or 1099, which is code in the United States for employee or
Mhm.
consultant, it doesn't matter. Your staff. So, and
Right.
you answered the question exactly how I would probably answer it, because it's almost impossible to, when I first started out in the virtual CISO realm, I tried the cold calling stuff, and you realize very early on that if they haven't started to walk down the path of understanding that they need the risk management experience in there, then you can't convince them. They
Mhm.
have to have that nucleus first to reach out. So, um,
Yeah. I mean, I do run across a lot of companies too that just don't feel like, I guess the mentality is they don't feel it's responsible to have a part-time security leader, right? They
I,
figure, hey, if we say security is important, then we should have the top level guy in-house full time. And CFOs have been fractional for ages, right? A long time.
well, and then that's what I was just thinking. It's like I don't have a CFO. Well, I have a part-time CFO, so I don't need a full-time one
Mhm.
with my business. Well, I know that all of this, the marketing aspect, the running your own business, and just being in cyber in general can be extraordinarily stressful. Um, and you really very much need to get away and
Mhm.
decompress. We talked a little bit about that before. What's one thing that you do to get away and decompress from the stress?
I like to work with my hands.
hmm
Whether it's going out in the garage and you know, making a birdhouse or whatever the case is, working in the yard, doing stuff. You know, I like to do stuff with my hands. I also like to go fishing. I don't do that enough, but I like to go fishing. I find it relaxing, and you absolutely need to get away. You know, the one thing I remember, you know, I mentioned that I left Beaumont Health because it just got too stressful for me. I remember my wife, like a couple months after I left Beaumont, saying to me, "You're a different person."
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily see that when you're in the middle of it, right? You
No,
don't see how it's impacting you.
you don't. I had a similar experience, and when I ended up leaving that position, and it's the people around you that can tell the difference when all is said and done. Because I was one of
Yeah.
those. I dreaded Sunday nights, going in on Mondays, and being in a toxic environment and all that.
Mhm.
So, well, what about future plans? You going fishing today?
Not today. I've had a cold all week, and you know, the air quality here in Michigan has been terrible this week. So
Oh, is that the
I think
fires and all that up in Canada?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I heard
coming
about
down
that.
from Canada. I mean, the air quality's been terrible,
Uh-huh.
but I just need to get past this cold. Um, but we'll see. I mean, we might go visit some of our kids who are down in the Detroit area. I live on the west side of Michigan, so it's about a 3-hour drive.
Okay.
But in
I've
terms
never
of,
been.
you know, future plans for my career, I mean, I really like what I'm doing now. You know, I did mention this has been a challenging year for me because two of my longstanding clients got acquired last year. And
Yes.
so early this year that relationship went away. And so I'm really only about 50% employed right now. And as much as I like that, I'm thinking, is this retirement? You know, only working half time. But, you know, I look and say, you know, ideally, I'd only like to work another handful of years. And so I want those to really count financially too. So I want them to be strong financially. And so looking at other work. But at this point, I'm much more driven by doing meaningful work.
Right.
Um, you know, I've said I would consider going into a big company again, into a full time role. If it's a respected enterprise, somebody I know and support, I would be willing to do that. But I find working with the SMBs to be very meaningful, right? You can tell when you step in, they need the help,
Yes.
and you know you can pretty quickly make an impact.
Yes,
And so more than
absolutely.
anything, I just want to do meaningful work, regardless of whether that's, you know, at an SMB or an enterprise, or whether it's a startup doing really cool things that are innovative. Um, just something that, you know, feels meaningful to me.
Awesome stuff. Well, if you are a small or mid-sized business and you're looking for a virtual or fractional CISO, check out Doug's LinkedIn page and give him a holler. He's ready to rock and roll here. So, Doug, it is so wonderful having you on today. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Greg.
And everybody, stay secure.